In this video, what we're going to do is look a little closer at what we did with the school table and linking it up to the students table. And that's going to get into our primary discussion, which is about relationships between tables. How do tables relate to each other, and the design and setting up good design for the relationships between the tables. So what we did in the last video, we created this table schools and we added 3 records to it. Again, we noticed that the primary key is the school ID. And you remember the school ID did not have to be an auto number field, but it does have to have unique values in there. So we have 3 different values. And again, this is the primary key for schools, the school ID. So what we need to do is link that up to students. So I'm going to look at the students table. And I want to point out something about good design of tables within your database. Let's close out the schools table. If I go back to students, let's pretend we had never created the schools table, but we know that we want to track schools for each of the students. What if we had just done this? Say we have the students table here and we know we want to track school name and phone number. So maybe we added a column for school school name, and we added a column for school phone. And let's say we were adding data and I'm going to abbreviate here, but let's assume Jake Smith goes to Loyola, and the number is, I'm going to abbreviate here. I'm just going to put in 3 digits. It's maybe 847, whatever. And Karen Danzig goes to Cristo Rey, and we know that's a 773. Peter also goes to Loyola. That's an 847. Russell goes to Loyola. That's always the same phone number. It's 847, whatever. Olivia goes to Cristo Rey, and she's 773. Again, I'm not putting in the whole phone number, but you get the idea. All right, I'm not going to complete the rest. But what's going on here, we have redundant data and we don't ever want to do that. So if we had not built the schools table and done it this way, for this, everyone who's a Loyola student, the phone number is always the same. So we've got redundant data. So what we're creating extra work, and there could be a potential for putting in a wrong number. So say these 3 students that go to Loyola, the phone number is always going to be the same. So what we should always do in that case is break it out in a separate table like what we did. Because if not, we have redundant data. The same with Cristo Rey, it's always the same number. So that's an example of why we don't do it that way, and why we did break it out in a separate table for schools. We don't want redundant data. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of these 2 columns, school name and school phone, because again, we've got that in a separate table. So I'm going to go to design view, school name and school phone, and you notice I can just highlight there the 2. Once I get the arrow and put it in this column, I've got the 2 fields there. I can hit the delete key and just delete them. And it says I must save the table. I go back and they're gone. So what we want to do now is actually link up that schools table. So what was the primary key for the schools table? Let's go back to it. If I look at it, the primary key is this text field with the abbreviation in there. So I'm going to go back to student. In the students table here, I'm going to add the school ID field. It's going to be short text to match the data type of school ID. I've added it there, and that's what we're going to use to link up to the schools table. So before we start adding some data in here for school ID, I want to show you something very important in Access, how you look at relationships. And that's under this tab for database tools. We haven't done anything under this tab yet, but if you go in here, there's a lot of features of Access in here. What we're going to look at now is the relationship. So there is a whole thing here on relationships. And when I click, I go in here and you can see what's going on in here. Some relationships have already been established between tables. And you may wonder, well, how did that happen? It happened when we created a lookup data type. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but before we go back to look at that lookup data type and how that established our relationships, I want to point out in here, what you see are the different tables. We don't have the schools table in here yet, but we have the 4 other tables. And you'll notice the field that's the primary ID for each table, which for these tables were auto number fields. You'll notice here it has that little key symbol next to it. That's our primary key. So each of our tables has a primary key, which is very important. And you notice within the table, so with the states table, for instance, it's linked to the organizations table. The state field within organizations is linked to the ID field in states. You notice with students, the student ID is linked to the student volunteers within the service events table. And so on. The organizations is linked to the organization name of the service events. We'll talk about that a little bit more, and I want to come back and look at these relationships. But before we do that, I want to go back. Let's, I can I've saved the changes, I can do that. I'm going to show you a different way to link up tables. This is an alternate way to do it. And so we have the schools table here. We want to link up that school ID to students. So we have the ID field out here. But right now there's no relationship between those two tables. When I went to database tools and looked at the relationships, there was no connection between this table and this table. And what it would allow me to do is put in anything in here. So I mean, I'm just going to put in garbage data, a bunch of X's, and it's not finding and linking up that school ID field, you'll notice in there. So I'm going to erase that for now. What we want to do is link those up. And one easy way I could link up those tables is to do what I showed in the last video, do a field that's a lookup and relationship data type. However, what I want to show you is how to link up those tables by looking at the relationships. So I'm going to go back and look at the relationships again. Let's go here. And again, we notice schools is not in here. I'm going to add that table and create the relationship. So if I go here, show table, schools, add, close that out. And what is school ID linked to? It links to the school ID in students. So I'm going to link those, and the way I can do that is if I highlight school ID, carry it up here right on top of the field, and you'll notice it comes back with this screen showing I'm creating a relationship between those two, and you'll see it shows here school ID in schools links to school ID in the students table. That's exactly what I want, and that's what I'm going to create. But before I do that, I want to do something important here, enforce referential integrity. We're going to talk more about that in the next video, but this is showing you at least how we can create that relationship And once I click create, and now it's telling me I can't because the tables are actually open here. So that's important step. I'm going to click OK. I can't create it yet until I close these other tables. Let's close all this out and close these tables, close all, go back to relationships. That's an important thing to remember. You want to close all your tables before you start editing your relationships. So here's school ID. Again, we want to link it to school ID up here. I just click once on school ID, move the cursor up. It's become that symbol with the plus sign. It's letting me create the relationship. Again, I want to enforce referential integrity and create the relationship. Now it's letting me create the relationship. And something very important, what it's done here, it's created these symbols 1, and this means many, infinity. The relationship between them is such that one school could have many students. That's exactly what it's indicating there. So in each school could have many students, multiple students, the 1 and the infinity. Okay, in the next videos, we're going to talk more about all this. I think it can be a little confusing, but we're going to talk more about that. And we'll talk about how these relationships were already established. And with these, we also want to enforce referential integrity. But again, with this relationship, I'm going to click on it, double click on it actually. And you can see here, you can see the relationship. It's between the correct fields, school ID, and I've enforced referential integrity. I want to do that. Don't worry about these other two for right now. It's created a one-to-many relationship. I click OK, click close to save, and there you go. In the next videos, we'll talk a lot more about that.